Namo Buddhaya, Namo Dharmaya, Namo Sanghaya, Namo Guru Me, Namo Buddhaya, Namo Dharmaya, Namo Sanghaya, Namo Guru Me, Namo Buddhaya, Namo Dharmaya, Namo Sanghaya, Gandhi Lanje Gunge Tokai, Rakara Shosa Punja Chodze Chege Boy King Losan, Sedai Chepa Nidre Shesus. Dengya Namkai Sente Pede de Gyeltsen Lama Ingebe Zomkrai Dalo Ende Be Sanayim Shincho Demba Enje Che Kelja Shosus Neje Chinge Enje Be Lodendo Kesa Nave Genjo Licious Rabe Bege Lame and Zebe Gotonde Dembe Dende Laja Ye Oinche Ye Nazo Medo Dante She and Dobe Nase Edishai Mozo Shanan Yen Jatson de Sanaim Shincho Echela Echeba Kai She Do Me Dene Esaba Lenga Ye Mi Ye Jige Sebra Ye Domba Ye Sumge Ye Medenj Yene Enje Paya Dabe Ye Sosoroish Yeme Ayende Dre Mande Ay Dobla Chege Bambe Ayende Joyende Combo Gege Laje Ente Bar Ajaya Sambaya Dabe Yira Jeze Lamaya Damba Chege Kala Chenze Jinjin Chedaya Zambe Yendenje Zema Sabje Chege Chaba Abdos Namjaya Yese Yule Shemba Zamdu Kolaya Chano Mingai Tame Namo Zijo Rabban Sede Bardo Mino Demborish Naye Chinya Sabe Gewan Bendo Endewa Moonlight Gambend Hebra Gyeltsen Zain Dabas Tembe Nyembo Rindo Sejes Meme Ayetse Ayete Chen Jeres Jeme Ayekembe Wambo Jambe Debo Male Jomze Sanvend Anje Engebe Ayetso Chiang Zongkaib Lord Sayan Dabe Shabla Sewind Mano Zebe Ayete Chen Jeres Jeme Ayekembe Wambo Jambe Debo Male Jomze Sanved Anje Engebe Ayetso Chiang Zongkaib Lo Sayan Dabe Shabla Sewind Meme Ayete Chen Cheres, Chimia Kimbe, Wombo Chambe, Demoya Male, Jomze Sanbed, Anje Ingebe, Zoche, Zonkaip. Lo Sayan Dabe Shabla Sewind Valdean Save Lama Rimboich Taige Chiwoe Bemea Den Shoel Kadia Jimboe Gonia Jesund Gozoyan Doige Ngodoe Sedoes Valdean Save Lama Rimboich Taige Ninkarae Bemea Den Shoel Kadia Chimboe Gonia Jesund Shodaya Demoe Ngodoe Sedoes Valdean Save Lama Rimboich Taige Ninkarae Bemea Den Shoel Adia Jimbe Gonia Jesu Anchoe Nimbo Bardoya Tembora Shoe Masaim Jimmy Shiraya Paria Che Magia Mega Namke Ngo Nye Sosoya Randre Ishe Eche Desoem Geve Yumla Chazi Loya Teya Taya Gate Paraya Samgate Bodaya Soha Deya Taya Gate Paraya Samgate Bodaya Soha Deya Thaya Gade Paraya Samgade Bode Soha Ingerian Tonta Ege Joy Shewad Nede Genda Wand Tumbayan Joji Bin Som Zojun Nasha Denja Dendre Dele Sho Sa Shi Beje Junshi Meto Tam Re Ra Lin Shi Nin De Gen Ba Sanje Shindo Me De Yuwai Jogi Nam Da Shila Jibara Sho Yedaim Goro Redna Mendela Kaneria Daya Emin Chedan Tsoge Chonam Lae Jansho Bardo Dane Chapsoche Dage Chechen Yebe Sonam Ke Dola Penche Sanje Dubara Sho Chedan Tsoge Chonam Lae Jansho Bardo Dane Chapsoche Dage Chejro Jebe Sonam Ke Dola Penche Sanje Dubara Sho Ye Chedan Tsoge Chonam La Jansho Bardo Dane Chapsu Dage Chejro Gebe Sonam Ge Dola Penche Sanje Dubara Sho For the welfare of all the sentient beings, may I able to achieve the highest realization. And in order to achieve highest realization, may I able to receive these teachings, the great Lamrim Chenpo. So with the, may I will generate the right motivation. So generate that motivation. So first of all, I would like to read as an oral transmission. So.
Hiba deja gunje 瑜伽归同工者报道早上不如三节那么节送别那。可对吧？能进的了，对过的，可对吧？那么能最，可对吧？那么能最了那样大的工业同工就是。他说：“因把热度啊，先说我你嘛了你的，今天有事的这边你嘛你，朝鲜没去经个新见当时我中的当的，看不着我老说不今天就睡。现在高校让到别处去，对吧？这边你嘛你，对吧？这种都对吧？都当都写着就说。”咱们并不是特别写着的圣经老觉得我人虽为这了就没为圣经并不是这个的我们写的多，也晓得这个唐的人呢，就一当就经的，就给我这的就把当圣经有一件很啰嗦啰里啰嗦，写到我没有偏偏走就别人把我写搞那么用老把的语呢。Dieu me mami ba me Dieu me ba la jiva ba da de je se de paru de do paru de ngaru de sha shi jiva de su je tam se ba da Dieu me jiva da che se nyam de wa da de ba da yang da pu je shu pa be de ba ye da ba da chen ba da ra ji ro 파베가노 파열라 그비세도 꾸와다 저중종나 레베스 저중종나 세세르도 쉐시 뵙동시에와니 냠바마이 고고 돈는제니 마미 바미 바시와다 미바노 조시와 니소 대소는 쉐데네 동지리 위쇼바네 롱제나 저바당 소마다 비 타와쇼 쉐당 튜바르시这不是的，就把我这前期没投资的就把你弄就帮你，弄不出来，然后那个电梯起码老掉眼讲的人们说，真的一个投资的就把你，起码然后这点把他们这点的呗，下这的就把电梯选的这些的就不接了，起码呢。起码能把它到别到两个人的，我都就是说，同学写稿了就的，我给怎么说不了，我今天就搞，就搞灯笼就不是说不做行不行呢？怕没写钱不？你把他到了女的老同学把我都没得一到了，可么能呢？等把我的当心了是不没关。他到同学把搞同学为人把样是为写了件那多么的来当啊乱就。天天那老郑的说那这个大王啊当是写了家写不说那去什么当。当我差不多就我写到同天把人跑着看人过，这种把我老包了。然后呢，我写我在这那同么的写是不是当老命那个三百线都当嘛这玩意儿贵讲。就业让对个的，就业让对个样的他也不得不来。我是让你没得钱的，这不是的这么样，让个是这个是被现到的我的美女，全球国内的人多他都，这全球的人多他大，多的小子呢，这些的你没得完，你的我这些的做不了，先说。多些要上升个的话，到7月多你说的上升个基本那个他不用了，他马上呢，去年多月的谁的要没别去都不知别去都真那么就中意去的，上升到去年，上升到去年的没别去了，说不也多年的过年的。因为我现在写作内容就是小时他们这现在这里，主把几把也老没的，对吧？都主把几把老没的，对，他们对吧？就他也考了， 다들 뒤에서 되고 되다 되는 심지민 실험 시에서 내가 제일 상승 시켜봐. 타예정 dom체와네 파진당 뒤시 대외 상승을 라고 상이 유조 민바라셔와다 신이 제메저니 레메라바티니 파진당 뒤시 뒤시바 뒤르베셔 대다영 상살리 버르셔바 남제네 다외 상지 용소 미바시도 유무번 남제 니베신제당 용소 미바시도 저르디노 상지서바나 게외체노제 레니티 버르바쇼 셰소 티셔데양 티니가 티고바 이디 제바시바도나 사자시에 저저들 님제소바시다 드베 최니 추치부 장주신 비셔바네 럽제 버신 두소 냠샤 랑베 닌저제 소제 럽데 버르 두제 소바다 제지 도바 수에 사즈레 당 소제 랑 라와데바데 냠제 강 강시 좀 시루르 메도 시루로라 시루로라 냥샤디야라지도 되장데 사디 시오니 사디 시오 시니다 샤르지오 지바 라우동 가시 냥샤디오 공로 파지도 보송다 삼데다 샤르 요 가시 제도 되야 장우 동르네 냥제니 그런 라세베 초지 시주 쉐서벌레 그 셈바 가시네 냥샤디 양종 조심 이야비알라 베트에다데 지미 빼게 따버니 쇼그 따와 kum제베 제예도 뭐 정어자 타라 로바 조시 냥바샤베 뒤다데 시니 라도 찬님신 디유다도 콤바지 셰소 데다 지오시도 메드죠 차가와 로로 마산베 테 로로 마산베 테바나 이동 지제보나니 상선나지 장당보니 냥소시문이 장노 시버르시니 몸베유 춘셔도 호바시바나 신은 베바메데 베발메데 바라게 ngang은 조바 몸에 코마게 제데 무소 조미니 바토니 테로 로중이 코방도나 lâm nambara dawa le che shin jang che de yon de ta yo de le kha ye te bar je no je de de ya ji de la de wa ji ju dang de da ko ya chi ni je ja yu ren ko ni she ba me ju shi바다 찔고 버스 뒤서 라게 네 랑이 줄 대레 요데 다네 용고 마지 뼈가 라시소 대저 서서 도버소 남게 저발라 멜로베 탐메 저발라 멜로베 탐메라 주심 쇼게서 남게 장 lum데 종알라 베니 저발라로 비 또유베는 필나 domba sungna shindu tembara jobe beba chao jibushi bulanji rembale musim jama ta jesi jawa jala be lamji sheba shesindo dadi shuzum te kaje tere kharsa due gobashi dadi due gobashi na duzu mangbo yo takar du kawa ta be khosa shindu ambol tuboda ene dine kansa lobarda wado be konro de logda mangboda o tide thongse wa ka ge khda da ti she ro ti chidang mise so di shi di je sha ta shiba ni dija chidang dije jodan gar jiba ni dija gungi tongun jo tap sangbo sangye nam ji sungbe na khod de nam ji del tengo dis wo de da karsa düğünü boşuyla yatıyor gece de karşısına düze tabii simge tabii şarjı bayını karsa şarjı simge de simge tabii tomşin zorlan koya tamcıya başladı ti tondo kuru asıgırda ti tondo so koyuyorsan sanjina leksun bası ti ya çacıdı yakıyor de la ini düğünü boşuyor riva 코디는 델레 코디와니 델레 땡고 쇼델 다 되고 실 땡고 다 가지 그래서 코아지 녀바마세 있는 동시와 동시 돈을 쳐봐세디 누가 코디바다 대만남 천들라네 양다데 그게 동그 저시지 탑상인 거 라도 가스 디다 너데 인생에서 그런 거는 줘서 어떻게 간지 코디바다 대만남서 코디바다 되어서 샤유스마도 들어와 천들라네 양다데 이지미 땡 거래시 그게 동그 저시지 탑상인 거 라도 가스 제다 세제 탑지 동시와라 이니 되고 보시오디야 in tongue song should is the suicide.
Yes. So the Geshe read this oral transmission from page 227 from the what do you call the volume in the 5, which is in the fourth. The fourth, there's with the 4 ways of gathering. This number 4, the needs for those who gather following to rely on them. So from there until the last page, which is the 231. So in this, actually, we already cover up roughly on this. There are like 4 different ways of gathering the disciple. And then we have just covered up before that, like how to gather those who are like beginners, those who have wrong view, those who are very hard to tame. So how skillfully that by pleasant speech and giving generosity and so forth, that how we have to gather the disciple. So these are like already explained. So now in number 4, the needs for those who gather following to rely on them. So which also that explain that these are the one of the highest way or the most supreme way to gather disciple. So that's why the Geshe was reading this. Those who involved in gathering the followings rely on this means, especially those, the great practitioner, the Bodhisattva, who has dedicated their entire life to benefit all the sentient beings. Those who, the Bodhisattva practitioner, who totally rely on these 4 ways of gathering, because these are the most supreme ways to gather and to the disciple.
다 ngaba nyemba ma ni jidin su de tim nyema de se da de ko jin de nyemba ma de ji he de ro da nyemba ma se de in jidin su de tim nyemba ma da chö gi nyemba ma ni ya res jidin su de nyemba ma de res da ko je ngod nam yi de ro da be cha hi de le se ya da eni de wo yi be se ya do de res di eni shen zum da de be ko chö je me wa shen and they come to the Tambu Nilin, what is your dress. But church got nearby my decoration in a church is so a lot of summer, and it set him down, and the polish was children because just if you saw so carry movie and the Mubana any church dress.
So the 5, there's the subject 5, which shows this, a somewhat elaborating explanation about these 4 ways of gathering the disciple, which also, like, even though there are 4 ways, but it is like concluded in the 2 types, which is like in a pleasant speech and then giving the Dharma teaching. So the first one, which is like the giving, the first one, which is included in pleasant speech, as to the worldly custom, which is like in order to gather, you have to firstly giving generosity and so forth, and also by speaking properly, like nicely, like you're concerning their health and wealth, like how, like asking, and with the smiling face, not like grumpy face, but grumpy speech or slander, but you speak politely, pleasantly to convince the disciple. And then the second, which is like giving a right dharma. So when you give the dharma teaching also, which is also based on like teaching about the ethical vow, that what are the commitments and vows that we have to hold, and together with, and then also teaching about the 6 perfections. So these are the dharma that giving a dharma to convince or gather the disciple.
어디 다디 집에 대바 스루세체 다 대바세야 주 데레 다 거기 제가 대바 뭐 대바세 이셰바 제자데 제가 다 당회 대바세야 저 애들 뇌뇌베 대바다 이 이제 대바세 제가 대바실 숨서 해도 와 제가 대바면에 가지 쉬어 가래나 쉬어는 지대 가래나 들 요대 마도나 에네 들 주고 말아 제가 다 대바도 그 군조이나 근데 구조선 자도 좋아 구조선 그 연대시 애는 소소피게 코아지 지라긴선 들리게 구조선 누바예바시 어 된데 키야데 신선 될 걸사 되래 다 딜 디선데 그 통해 되버리지 오르와 제제 애는 통해 되버 쓰름 담세 쓰름세도 다 조되래 근데 다 롱도르 뽕는시야 심진데 미셔와서 뭐 지름지에 이 퇴바도스 되잖아 다 되겨들이야 아니 대바다 지름서 러발 알리 아니 집에 신일 때는 인디레데 롭좀셔고로 롭좀 마이나 하고 말어 하고다 근데 퇴바다 동화다 셔럽게 소리 잡네 제가 퇴바다 퇴바시야시 동화서는 다 지지바다 티셰 셔럽게 와서 잡네 거기다 버리지 뭐 돌을 잡네 이네 디거네 아니 쇼셰 우레스 왔다 펜바 대와 거기서 잡네 펜바 대외시도 심도 쉬어도 못다 디 꿀웅식면도 펜바 대외시도 심진 쉬어도 못 진짜 쇼셰알 꿀웅 와요와 니군야다도 샤 나네 팀 나도 가지 치몽 문제점이 시디시야도 저리 탈배도 시야도 가지 꿀웅 잡는 뭐요와 그래서 펜바의 대외시에 타두게 페이지 다 디바레 타두도 시고 다가서 세디 통마에 봐 엔 시와 펜지리야 대야 더다 디레 산 동그레스
So, and like when the master or who guide the disciple to the right path, when we give a teaching, firstly that we have to convince when we give a dharma. First, we have to. If they are beginners, those who have a difficulty, those who have lots of wrong view, then you firstly give a right teachings and then try to gain the faith towards dharma or practice, towards practice, like about the morality or about the six perfections. So when you give the teachings, firstly that you have to you have to explain about what is like about details about the three refuge. What is the benefit of taking refuge if you don't have proper refuge? What are the effect of not having a refuge? So once you explain clearly, when they understand, then they will have a faith and then they will try to follow that. And together with about the morality also, if we teach properly about the morality, then once they understand, then they will know how to hold properly. If we don't have proper morality, then what kind of effect that we will have. So when we explain those things, so that means firstly we have to teach and let them study properly, guiding them and helping them to study properly each and every details about those, the morality and then six perfections. So once we teach then, so eventually like in order to teach, firstly like those who have committed in order to benefit all the sentient beings, the motivation must be right motivation, because if the one who is trying to guide have a wrong motivation, then we will never teach them in a right way, maybe something in a selfish way, or we may misguide them. So firstly, one must have the right motivation, and right motivation when we guide them. So this is not only like we are guiding them just to benefit in this life, in this present life, but also we are trying to guide them, teach them, so that they can understand and follow, and then after following that they will be able to achieve, even though there are three different kind of realization, like benefit this life or to and the better life in next life or nirvana or highest realization. But right now, which explain about is to achieve the fully enlightenment. So for this purpose that we are trying to guide them. So that's why at the beginning, like you teach them and then develop the faith towards those, and then and also explaining about the ethical discipline, studying about the six generosity, six perfection or generosity, and also the other all the way to wisdom. So you're teaching properly, not only to benefit this life, but to achieve the full enlightenment.
다 디다 다 쇼동다 디게제 쇼동다 델비게 다 소소 비게 펜통인도 소소 뭐시마 가보지 없어도 디레 쉬쉬 에네 현다 심지 찬임으로 마시는 되고 말이라고 다르와 런스베 다다 좀메베 셈지 펜베 식제바다 다 데로 그 코루 유럽 시시 런스게 데로 딜라 에네 좀메베 셈지 시디자는 콜이야 에네 so ya go paru le tsam na de la choa me ba en phem bi sem ji en bi ko di kong de so shi da xiao le xia de是吧这个吧当时ông bu xin de wa yi xie ba me ba jiao wa tang de lang ne xue yi dang jue jing yo de de chu ba da ông bu xin de wa se na de le da de le kar sa no de no yu de tam ju na de wa fa ba lam shi mu sa yi do 남주고 자데 랍다 찐단 랍 책이라 책디 마이 다모 몰라 마진제 ene dentima ene din 랍서서 말했어 ene din이 해다지 일단에요 랍데 딜라를 잘라 뭐 ene 타기 콜랍서서 말했어 ene 코 랍다 강게 마피니 ene 코 랑가가 ene 문인 되게 그랬어 ene 상이 좀 된지 그랬어 인상이 저 가라 있을 때 내가 들으듯이서 내들이 나를 희망 아무것도 되고 있어. 근데 인상이가 아니처럼 야쇼스란 인상이 랍충 쇼제는 그 책도 라르자라 스마야 자 당보디 애니 gelong도 저게 샵자도 시다 당시 애니 데스코 디바야 때저 애니 케자지 가지 저 파발람 줄 시디잔 애니 가서 심지어 돈을 쇼디 나버지 근데 그 로지어로 어디 나지 이 체험에 와서 들이 이 시사들 다 용사 멀어서 육해야 좀 말이야 돼.
Yes. So, like when we guide the disciple or leading the disciple to the how to gather disciple at the time, like like even that when you find somebody who has the wrong view, who has an intention like intention to kill or to take one's own life also, like we just cannot give up also, like because sometimes most of us when we give a teaching, that we have some kind of closeness towards whom that we have desire to, and sometimes we have a long distance, a gap between those who would we dislike it or who don't know. So we have that different kind difference in like giving teachings to us also. So if one is a true like master or guidance, we should not have those kind of bias between the enemy or those who don't like or dislike or don't know, you know. So we should not have that. Even in time, like if somebody who's likely to take your life also, we should not just let it go. Even though it may be discouraging also, we should not discourage ourselves, but we have to like guide them. Even that some disciple that who has really difficult to understand, who is like a dull-headed or like no intelligence at all. Also, we should not give up, even though that one may like you to discourage because of like it's so difficult to explain. Also, we should not give up. That's why that. Like I think we all know about in the liberation in the palm of your hand, there's one disciple called Lamchen, we call the Arya Lamchen, who was one of the most dull-headed person. So when he was like in the monastery that time, that he was expelled from many by the many master because it was beyond their ability to teach them because they won't understand anything. So he was explained from many masters, and eventually he was just on the street crying. Then eventually that when he met Buddha, so Buddha explained what happened, then he explained the situation. So eventually Buddha took him, and then he was renounced. And then after that, like firstly that he was like cleaning the hall or walkway or corridor, and then cleaning the shoes and those things. And eventually, by after purifying all the negativities, and slowly that how that skillfully the Buddha taught him, and then eventually that he became one of the most well-known the master, that, and all this happened because of not giving up towards the disciple. Even though we may met up with such a most challenging person also, we should not just give up, but we have to use any skillful means to guide them toward the right path.
What is that? Seems you can also looking loju xeba le xie de me pen bi si ji bi ni ma ma xie ga le lo ba dang si ni ka sa ji ma mi ba la ji ma mi ba ji ba dang ji ba pa ma dang den zhe ge xie de pa ru xin pa ru de qiao yi ji ba de ci zhen ji dam xie ba dang yi member devada teaching simnyaba devada devada yanta pui chela pabe de bashi tomada kimba da rad shunga pa me ba no pa yele go bi shi go a tan tezu shunga no se she de she ji be dum chi ba ni nimba mai go statire sha simji yoji kelo se da Dira could thou share consumer using it in Kelo, the you go go sing it today, she does it today. Lo Shiva, shed on me was, shed on me was it is all quite be Kelo that today built out, Logdo shed, and go at the Shina, till in quality of 100 time ever she's or 100 myself she's. This is what that Karsa, he never see with the 80. Karsa. Jay Nimu dress is Nimu Tangdi a consummation signal. She did you see you Nimu the Jelly dressing or Maji. Go Chawad, you get till dressing or Maji, Kansa dressing or Morris. From Coach Chambers, Yingi Yamara. You disagree. Shed down me was. What that shed down me, Pembe 6 GB, never more, Chico and Nandas, or that did you are in the you travel with the Mingi, the loves the Joshi, she like how the she like go and Nanda, Loba Tangsa. What did that you mammy what is the Rava? That there's surely a there's the Tano again. You remember Dribat Bomata, the Drake should do, Poru to show you, Jimba the Sidim Gitam Shevata, steam that. You remember Joe Bomata, said that be late on board. This is all that you need to big jibbles of Joe Bomata. The Drake should do, any Karsa should do, Noru the show, Jimba, something, Noru the Senna, things like that, Reva. Nearly, Tarba does the Yuko, there was Gelu go, Yale, dentro the Kiewa. She the Tarba Noru Dali, the Ruby Gale, any big jibble ceremony here, Lela the Shevers. Tam Shiva dance. That direction in this Karsa, Tarba de Logan Shoni. Any call Karsa, so the call days you join and you mean by devastations. That you mean the like devastate any they hit down to see the Tarvata at the demo or the Amores. Young that pug sure Pugbe, the but she don't dance. That Tarvata. In the Karsa, Kimba the Radishung, Palmebanum, Paula Gubi, shed go at dance. The Palmes and Terota Kanje, Kimba the Radishung, Suena. So the Pijolum road, the Lunga, Java Karshi, you made the Delia, and the Dashi of Zan, Mashisha, the Kora Kondo to Leisha, the Karsa, Palme or Sigara. So that usually show what which 看这这种度假些呢，可这种度假也不好过嘛，是吧？可甚至像松亚面这个康熙大些，现在的前不的就跑没有那跑有个位，其实在跑有些过来是，跑没是你这些的，这种康熙没就些的，个菜的起码人家来，不可是啥，别个说的东西讲个的是，这跑没这不行呢，康熙没是个把长东个的，但古嘛古个的。Gyeltsen些个的，讲个，可是我是说话，现在的讲呢，至少呀，年末月吧的，马西的呀，我也不，南下的了呀，当时嘛是，那是考试呢，康东的写的个是吧？现在这了，这是旁边是要嘛的，是，古嘛古些嘛的，康熙嘛的这强东旁边是要嘛的，这是讲的成了破的，没写的，古嘛古那成了破的，是啊是的，哦，你这拉不起家呢，朋友俩家伙的是吧？有月其实。国外的这种状那么社会学的学些形式，这种状况那么是，他这些挺感动的，这种社会呢，这种社会也是，社会学的学些形式，别东西话，你把没有过是，别东西那他这来讲是，这个是就叫做么子解释些这个，这个话，确实别东西呢，上级那么大这么的，连就是搞这么的这个，这当别个也这些下去是吧？这就是学一百多岁了，这学我这时候是对吧？
So, so even like in order to guide the disciple to the right direction, like even like if somebody like you feel like very deceiving towards their master or the abbot or the elders, like even to those like it's very hard to tame also. We have to use a skillful means with pleasant speech or skillful means to guide them. Even those who even those who have lots of hatred, those who are like if they are not suitable disciple, those who have not ripened to transform them into a right direction. Also, like we must have the patience and enthusiasm and never to give up and try to guide them in a right direction. Because even though it may be very difficult to lead and guide towards the right direction because of their negative thought, because of they have the because they are not suitable suitable vase to hold the precious teachings or guide them. It may be it will be very difficult, but there's a saying that there's no person we call the no person with no delusion, because a person normally in Tibetan is called the one who is likely to fall down, which is like means they are likely to have delusion. So that means without delusion, there's no way that we won't do such things. That means there's no person without any delusion. So that means we are likely to make mistakes. So that's why with these thought in our mind that, oh, this is our responsibility to help them to overcome those negativities. So in order to help them, so firstly that of course it may take time, it will be difficult, but we have to be in a very skillful means. Firstly, explaining that if we have such things, explaining about the law of cause and effect, explaining about the cause and effect, then we have to explain that if we do such thing, we may likely to be reborn in an unfortunate rebirth. And so if we are born into an unfortunate rebirth, then there was never will have a difficult and never had the opportunity to do good thing. So that way we explain with all the logic and reason. So even in like explaining about the 10 non-virtuous action, that these are the 10 non-virtuous action that if we engage, then these are the consequences by in engaging into the 10 non-virtuous actions. So when we engage, then these are the main causes and conditions to lead us to an unfortunate rebirth. So with these, like explaining, so explaining, then eventually that we explain that how to overcome. So that's why the main discourse start like explaining about the Four Noble Truths or the 10 virtuous actions. So it explain in detail step by step. So because when we explain this, so that depends like those who are beginners, we explain in logic and reason and simple teachings about, and also to at least to help them like explaining about to have at least to have a fortunate rebirth. And then after that, the once like we know that those, even though that they are as a considered as a practitioner, is one householder or who has renowned themselves as a practitioner, then even though sometimes because of the lack of understanding on true dharma, like sometimes we become careless, careless or even without mindfulness. So sometimes because of that of mind without mindfulness, then we start, even though we consider as a spiritual, because of the carelessness or mindlessness or lack of mindfulness, then we may engage in stealing or killing or gossiping or slandering or misusing all the virtuous actions because of the lack of knowledge or because of carelessness. So even to those that we have to explain that like uh, in a proper way. When we explain, so it eventually, when we explain, it help them to clear the doubt. So once we explain it properly and clearing their doubt, then they will slowly like try to filter that, oh, these are the action that we have to be discarded, and these are the the positive and the dharma that we have to be applied so that one can be able to have the higher fortunate rebirths. So that way, they skillfully that we had to explain, even though it may be very challenging, it will be very difficult. But since our tasks that we, like as a bodhisattva practitioner, that we should not give up, even though we may face the most difficult situation, in order to guide them to the right direction.
What is that? That Karsa, Tonju the Mummy remember showed, remember no choice of yin so this some the Sandy Tons in the Juvan, Lungjunam Druva, Swan, very top, share the timbe, she the Juba was. Say Chimin Tons in the Jubani, Lungju Bangnes, Lumu Sore, Rabjuna Gova de. Dichimala, Dewa Ngeya, Dirma Nge sauce. Timida, Dajidan de any Yawasa, Chusea, the Dewa Dubjiro, Digajavida. Dere Kaje, Tom Mamiba Senada, Dere Ben Chug, Namjana Mahinga, Dira, Tiso Nale, Sendi in the Tonzi Jubanis, Sendi Labja de Yago, Tambo, Sendi Labja Yavas, said the Lungju de Yago, Goya. She has the Lungju Dulu to the Lungju Nam Drubatans, Lungju Drubdant yet. In the Sumas, that the Drub said that Lungju Dudu and Tapsi Drogoza, tell the Yogi Thousand Dover, my CEO Marcy, Loto the Mandeva Shogores, as you said. So Suma the city did that. Any Drub said the Nor Lungju of the Bay, young consumers of Hami Tora Maiva. Any Koya, Nyarza Shiva, the Suma Sigra. This was that's what the. Then the Pewadi, Tiga Yangjoya, and you were going Yangjoya, no matter you del Pewa Sigurova. Or this some children Shiva, Shiri Jubo, Serva, what did it? Lungia them Drubata, Dudizan, any Pigay Yogi Travels, any Kazada, Sholons, no, any Pigay, Chuju, Druba Maeba, any Lama Guzakaji, Tamugo, and Drugo, and the drops and the any Lungju, the Lungju, the be Tayu of Haloma, and the Hazan Lungje Madawa. Hazan Yape Karsa, Yeva Yeto Maeba. Cause it didn't be removed in the Lungju Sosung Showers. So I say. Bear citizen, any there was that Lungju side and Tigalia no matter Mazena, Kosahi, but you will Lungje and called Pento Marwa. Chedati, no better called Maziva, no better Shen Seatella, Peva Sigurova. diye gangale ni be şöyle tabi şey juba o sidi zanla endisi var. Yogi çamzım da manje kandi jigden de be tambo tansha ge son jemna kevsan de da be lungba kora yongda na hide en mel gogo tanya da tire mai ba tambo taye şey son jaya da kandi lega karşı diye ganga yogi çamzım me ba şeva de şöyle de bas. Kandi lungjo de gogo ra lungjo ben de suji de de var ba. 저 롱주 루다들 여기 참선신 루야지다 참고시 루야니도와 그래서 참고신 도고서 단도되나
So now, working at the aims is twofold, which is like the bringing the immature, which is not ripened, and then also ripen to maturity and liberating the mature one. So here actually it shows about those who are not ripened, like uh, to firstly like in even in this life also, in order to be successful we have to accumulate, gather wealth, because without wealth we cannot do. So we also need wealth, but how to gather that wealth, that we have to know, because most of us sometimes, because when we want to gather the wealth in this life, like sometimes like we have to lie or steal or kill or do, because of all this negative the actions we try to gather the wealth. So one have to teach that in order to gather the wealth, that we should not engage with those kind of negative actions, or those involved should not involve with the negative actions. So there is a proper way, the virtuous way of accumulating or gathering the wealth. And then after gathering wealth also, then we have to know how to preserve that wealth properly. And then after preserving wealth also, like according to dharma, like how to be preserved and how to benefit others. So this is what like it explain about, like according to dharma, that we have to teach them and explain them that how to gather wealth, how to preserve wealth, and how to distribute, and how to use in order to achieve realization. So these are the things that it explained here.
어디지야 다 디네 다 지제 최심 최딜이 그게 동정 인에 들어 올라서 얘기를 했어. 다 최심의 동지고 조신 다 세로 동게 주이나 최심의 동지의 조바는 롱주 방내에서 롱무처에 잡도 쇼는 거 같아. 데려다 가서 셀로도 시는다 그 도고다서로디 총당네 애들까지 시네 애는 양내 시아줘로 어디 그래서 다 도고다서 비 뭐좀 시네 어디시고 제 로무소아서 다들 데려와 가지 최시도 다 세들 해발로 상기이나 인텔 디레된 거래서 다 그때는 좀 말아봐. 시도 잡도 쇼 로무소아 잡도 쇼한테 가르치는 데려와도 잡중세한테 가르치는 때에 그 최시야리야 애들 예견용어다 천재망가요라고 디렉게 저리면 이제 이집을 쉐쉐로 잡중도 고 말아봐. 근데 잡중에는 다 소수로 손던 이게 최시야게 천재야가다 예견용어에 잡도 쇼세야디 너무 상시시주도 잡중은 오시오로 디게서 데려와. 드체시마 대왕이자 내방에서서 다 디레시 도다도 쇼다시 최런시되나 애들 배 차도 년가 되는 섬도 년가 여러 와. 세던디 세시마디 대화용 거리 세들 동용 대화용 차고 말이서 나그 강의인데 대화용 말로 어떤 적 없다. 어떤 적 없다. 다세 디지니게 동시에 됐다. 디지우다. 아니 hilada 그 나중에 바요다 시iten시도 된 hilada 두개나 히네라도 저선 세들라 대화요. 땡이 대화 시마라티 애니 대화요 와. 그래서 디지니가 더 시도게나 애니 히리 학동서 거디야 애니 랍지 땡고 그래서 다들 rem바도 소소도 종소 방송을 해워라 와.
So now this one like to help explaining about how to fulfill your wishes in this life in a virtuous way, how to preserve, how to accumulate first, how to preserve, and how to distribute, increase and distribute the resources. So this is on this the one is only explained for this life, present life. Like if you want to be a true meaningful life, then we can live in a meaningful way by not engaging in negative action, but in a positive way also we can fulfill our life in this present life. And so now about our next, or in to have a fortunate life in next life and so forth. So in this also, like even though in order to practice dharma, you can be as a householder also, you can be with even renounce and then become a devoted person in order to practice. So even sometimes there's a misunderstanding that like in order to achieve Buddha or realization that you had to be renounced or you had to be seriously engaging, which is not necessary. Even though yes, that being renouncing have more time to practice, but they're more difficulty also, more challenging also. So that's why, because maybe this is explained at the time, at Buddha's time, there are more the followers who are more renounced. That's why maybe according to that. But it is not necessary that in order to be a realization that you don't have to renounce. Even as a householder also, you can be able to practice. So that's why like. In both ways, that if you are practicing diligently, then you can even being as a householder, even as a renown also, you can practice. So so that's why so it is explained about like you don't have to renounce totally, that you can as a practitioner you can be in any form. And then the third part is like that is for next, in order to have another fortunate rebirth, that is like you don't have to be renounced. So even as a householder, as a in a normal life also, you can have a fortunate rebirth by engaging in a positive way and virtuous way. Now for the for both the present, this life and the next life, in order to benefit both. So the highest way to benefit both is seriously engaging into the shamatha and vipassana, or the which is like the penetrative insight, or and then the meditative equipoise. This, by engaging in these two, is the highest way to benefit both.
Oh, dear, Karsa, Shobate, study that Karsa, Nika Tonjua, Hinisa, Ton, any losing Hinton say tourists to do all this or that. Want to pick Karsa, Dungen of the Yonda, soon Dungen Yonda, Ganga, any you move, Duja Konda Hida, they move the Taudo did do, and the same media show. She's the Hidden Tosona. Indian did nothing to Toba Ganga Kan, same the big Migwakawa, dear daughter, Shana Tia Shata, but Tana and Migwakawata and daughter, the woven and Sutaman, the daughter, but Tinega any Luda same like any Niman Yinga Dejana Kalika Meva. Some of the Lujiga Kalika Meva. Any big Donna Kalimingi, some of the Kalimingi, Nishamu took dinner, Kalimingi, Lizin Shinjan, they was the same that Louis Lerungia Jorwa. This is your. The Lizin the young but jealous, Lizin Shinjan said, seems jealous. That said, the audience, that said, give her that country. Same doing you made us sort of this and there's some things they can do. I said, tell her, Chiman number tap in the Tawa the Mando. Hard dislike. Nangal daughter, she was cut the Jawashima like the individual and young the Tories, that he needs you over there and they told the Mardi, she not and damn it all, she not and he needed young the Toya the Yorwa. The Jedan, she needed young the Tawata, London, mixed the Mardi. She not in the girls, she needed the tops on our tiller that Disney came in yours. That rubbed the show and the Kaji of Mama, she didn't. And the Seshima Yawu said the lady and the Dungimabutis. But the Shilad of the Gomes Dogshivina, and said the like in me, Shimala do some Butoshi. This is you got in the carton to be able to shower his.
So, so which is why by engaging into this the shamatha and vipassana, or the meditative equipoise and then penetrative insight, why this benefit in this life and present life is because by engaging into this shamatha and vipassana, eventually that one will be able to achieve the certain level of realization called the mental and physical pliancy, or which is called like it's like in a peace full realization. Because once we achieve in that state of mental and physical pliancy, that time like you're mentally that you are calmer, you're not disturbed, no other distraction can able to distract you from concentrating and meditating. And together with your physical pliancy, which is like you won't get tired easily, you won't get age easily, and you're physically you're fit for any terms of your practice, any situation that you want to engage into your spiritual practice, that you will be able to do in practice. Because right now, that because of the lack of this, the meditative stabilization or equipoise and penetrative insight, because of the lack of this, it's all because why it lacks is because most of us, when we meditate or so-called as a meditation, that our intention is mostly motivated or diluted by jealousy or desire or hatred or mental pollutions or mental wandering. Because of that, we are never there to focus purely. So because of that, it's like always once we have that like so much of delusions of jealousy and desire and mental disturbance or wandering or delusions, because of that, eventually it ripens with so many sufferings and difficulties, sufferings. So that's why like engaging into these two, and once we achieve this realization, then there is a calmness, there's a peace and pliancy that it will be always bring easier to practice without any distraction. So once we have that, then of course in this life also it will be a pleasant, fortunate and meaningful life. And also in next rebirth also it will obviously will have the highest state of realization and so forth. So that's why this is important in order to benefit in both.
What is that? Tunjo che kawa la yang jogo di no Gyeltsen ba de Gyeltsen jo kawa lungju Phuntsok na ni pa me shi shenbo la this was that the Tunjo wa che kawa ka yang jogo de Tunjo wa se di kanje ta nyamse ne ya la len ta ya de ba kanje ta any yeju bang se ya de ka tere ta chedum song jimba tang kanje ga la len ta ya de ta ene 그 너무 공부하면서 아니 시세라 칼레 가보여레스 그래서는 너무 겨와라 예자 마사발라 예원 준지바 까와다서 너무 박자를 때리면은 인체들 랑도를 가리시에는 될바 이시야다 될 뭐와시바 까고요라 어제 데리 바지를 찍기네 용거레스 바지지 그래서 룽제셔버 입을셨니다 그래서 동행으로 기본 저들이야 이 룽주다 디 푸순서바들 이행니 야 최시범 메오시니 디그 그 저도 소르아 신이요레스 제가 어디기 그래서 데저와 히셔볼라 네베 되다라 동주가 가와다 저 제다데 가지들 데저와 뭐뭐 방사 비에니 엔쇼 조카시 가지들 이메 방사 데서 여다 세들 비게 ed lungju do yabo yeza bige nasar me sonum ga angi kibo yeza in tel yeng ne chue bige dono me le no ko se ro wa ne be ta tongjo ba ka wa dang se odi go che de ne mudi ki ta la khum khum ba na ni tem ba de dang shi lim be ripa me go ta la tongjo ba ka wo sa da ter mi da 다 디데제이체 모두기 따와로 거기서 따와로 버티려 다 저 가시메 따와도 다이 따와서 Tidak kau mesti korang ni begitu awal kau minta, dia lah ini kau angkat digedi pangkat terus na, ini kerja lumbi ese, rigor migo ese, lumba se de kerja, hajan shera kau basi roa, lumba se nata, mishe na pikir ratu kau boti lumba se roa. Tidak lo thonji apa kau basa, sesuatu pikir sta dia dua gua sih thonji cuba se, nyam se lembe kau se la, ini le kaya ni hotel ye sida. Ngue geza maza wabe shöji pakja menge ti na wen ti ya nyamsa lenka wuji sha oris. Ngue geza timbu ye na ene tsende la bege beljo longjo de puzun so war shi ne iri beljo de ying ni. En chö ya ma do lün da chi ga ris. Ka shi ne ya ta lo wa shi ne ene ta ya mi de chö ke ma la shi ne. Ene chö lo ra shi ne ene bege do mu do shi. O ti de sum yo ris. O ti de do ti zare.
So here, like there are three different kind of the disciple, which will be really challenging to transform or guide them. Which is first one, which is like because of many obstacles. Like one, and firstly is because of the lack of good karma from the previous, so that's why it will be difficult. Second is, even though they have some good karma, because of good karma they have wealth and position, but because of only limited good karma for this life, it will be more difficult. And some of them because of the non-Buddhists, those who have the strong like conservative non-Buddhist view, then it will be very difficult to explain them. So that's why. So like for example, those who are very difficult to lead them to the right direction is the first one is because of the lack of good karma from previous life. So that's why there is like they may likely to face lots of obstacles and difficulty, and like even may not have even enough time, and so that's why like those who have no the positive or virtuous karma or the virtuous root of any virtuous imprints, then it will be really challenging and very difficult. And those, even though in their previous life they have accumulated it and they have some wealth and positions and those things, and even though they have those good imprints from previous, but they are limited meritorious imprint, so they normally like they have because of that they have the good karma from previous life, they will have wealth and positions and even some extent some good health and good health, so it will be difficult to lead them to the right direction, because they may think that, oh, it's everything is perfect, why should I practice, because I'm fine right now. But because of that also, like we normally like it's hard to bring them to the what they call the good right path. And then third one is especially those the non-Buddhist who have the stronger view on their own view. So those sometimes we call it like hard-headed wisdom, or like lack of wisdom, proper wisdom. So they will stick into their own view, and even no matter we try to explain in a very logic and reason also, it will be very difficult to tame them or understand them in even explaining in the right way. So that's why we may likely to face those three different kind of disciple who will be challenging to guide them.
어데 동시에 림바양 스타가리들 들어 코아제 니바마다 동시에 동티바세 동시에서데 림바야 시베셰럽제나 토말레 당할 죽스와 시바세데 지다 엉보디오 샤고라 시베주스나 셰틀 다보시데니다 미게주부고 세르담트레텐 비 코예님이 해 가서 년로 등에데 해야지 된로 등도 소한 링기사바 담가던 시디 담가던 시디정 in Tavataya, that given the tomorrow is Maria. That did it tell I said Jadin that Tarva, so you were Tarva something and Bonza Malabato, Tojamal so much in 디 심지 타지가 동아시 더 문도산 인 심지 타지가 동 상지 거버 돈이야들이 셔라 자셔도 인 사모 갔다 가지 자주서도 돈이도 하고 셔라 어디 넘어 참을 줘봐 셰 어디브라 어디 가지 소소 로도 사비 인 당화도 동으로 했어요.
So that's why, like, when we try to guide and lead the disciple to the right direction, so according to the ability of the disciple, that we have to try to guide them. So that's why it explains about how to with the respect to the stages of working at the aims. You firstly, like, you find the disciple, which is like the just beginner, we call sometimes the childlike intelligence, or like just a beginner is like a nursery or primary level. Then we explain like with giving the easy explanations, or about like giving generosity and pleasant speech and politely, and those speaking politely with pleasant speech, then we try to guide them properly. And those who are like in some extent in like a middling level, the middling level, then you explain in there in that level, that they can be able to absorb. So we explain accordingly in the middling level, and then guide them. And those who are in an advanced level, those who have the highest capacity or ability to absorb the teachings, then we give the profound teachings or deeper teachings about the six perfections and these teachings, and then we explain accordingly to lead them to the right path.
다 통트 봐서 다 가서 되고 희는 통트 봐서야 되라. 애니 현을 비게 롭서도 가서 땅면은 랑 때 나기 냠슬렌세야 돼. 통트 봐대로 파루 칸라 그거 대도 좀봐 사바 내가 셔봐. 되레다 애니 통트 봐서 가르세는 그게 다 파루 볼 이게 최ñ에게 가르 시에는 서바 구미야도 전습지야 가르 시에는 어디 버르벌 시에와 될 카에 시에와 나시기 엔 소소 냠스 렘밤 테라 사고 냠스 렘야 고고리스 다 같이 테르바 총장 주요다 최신기 되르셔다 테라와 다 되면 에디자 가르사 세금 시기서 저거로 제가 어디서 최신기 되고는 생이 되고다 파시아가가 소소사시도 또도 가가 소소 줄이여시 엔 냠님고도 현의 시에와이나 Any here pendo de Chinam Josea do Ganga Dina Yungorova. You tell Garigo, tell Shushing tell Garigo said Masala and Park Harishi, the Medab de Shiva, or Medab Lord, the Koran Sheva Leha, Sheva, some Sheva Tena Hiam, tell Laba Guru, Kadi, loves the Karijo in. We can't share the tell Labam, Tigbam, Yam tell Laba Guru, because the Matal that is your way. 런데바 셔와 서 어디 집에도 편도 말세라 됐다는 정말 지시 심지에 돌아 에드 메네스 삼바행도 당 마제와 괴장 조외 라운드 거디스 노티스 워다 다투시에 제다 파셰바디 나히 라소 줄도 바디 예밤 텔라하고 고데스 어 고고데 이나야 리지디 고고레스 됐다 토마스 다 저주심기도 가르쳐서는 심지어 탐지에 돈 사지고 어떻게 있어 못 될라요라 될라서 심지어 탐지에 돈 사지고 어떻게 있어도 심지어 동시에 해야 거라 제가 뒤시발에 아니 심지어 동시발에 얘는 좋아도 당부 소도 되고 그래요 다 소소 만드는 가르사 힘도 해야 말아 라모드는 힘도 쓰기도 와 어디도 되나시래 제가 소소 만드는데 두고 되거든. 이제 당부 뒤에 들어가지 통어 튀어버려야 돼. 마살라니 강시에와 송바. 쉬는 데를 하고 거다. 그래와. 뒤에 구리세요. 제가 소소 배를 그만 두고 있나. 이제 배를 그만 고죠 말다. 아니 그만 그니 이거다 힘을 살아서는 오페도 아야 말아. 어디 뒤에 저서다. 강가 릭디아리. 쟤도 수신기는 하고 그래 세도 되다. The Kadam to Zaina, the Ship Shia, the Shijom, Susan Johnson, the She Hita Hita Shea Mare, Susan Johnson and Dama Shigmento. She had the Dicari and the Tessari. Jesus is only being the Joadi and Tumbo you, so I didn't do go or do get.
So here, the consistency of behavior, which means like it has to be like whatever you said, it has to be meaningful to yourself. Like what you say means what you do, you say. It's like not what you say you don't do, then it doesn't make sense. So that means do as I say or as I do. So in that, like whatever you explain to others, so oneself has to follow the same, because whatever you're saying politely or nicely or like pleasant speech also, you have to follow that path. Because without following yourself, and if you try to say something to others, it won't make sense. So that's why even that if you want to explain about the Dharma also, firstly that you have to follow yourself. So even though if you can, that you have to understand before you explain, you understand, you practice, and if you can achieve realization and if you explain, that's the best. At least if you don't have realization also, you must have the realization and follow the footsteps of whatever you are explaining or guiding towards others. So that's why one must have that understanding, or if you can, the realization on whatever you are explaining towards others. So, and since from the very beginning, the whole purpose of explaining or guiding to the disciple to the right direction, our intention is we have take the bodhisattva vow to benefit all the sentient beings. So that's why, since that our intention is to benefit all the sentient beings, so that's why based on that, we have to try to explain and try to practice and follow that and try to achieve realization, and then you explain, because we have already we have a commitment, taken a vow to benefit all the sentient beings. So sometimes we have a saying that if oneself is stealing, then if you try to tell others not to steal, then it doesn't make sense. So that's why first of all, before explaining to others to not to steal, if you steal, this is the situation you'll face, then firstly you should not steal, and then we can explain to others not to steal. So most of right now, of course in this right now, most of the master, they explain because whatever they understand. But in those time, most of these Kadampa master, they never explain what they understand. Kadampa master only explain what they have realized. That's the difference, that those Kadampa master, whatever they have explained or given teachings to others, everything is through their realization, through their understanding and realization they have explained. So that's why it's a huge difference. So if we want to follow the same, so we have to try to understand and realize before we explain.
다디 콩디데 연대 타요 되월래도 되월래 강이랑이 마디시디 리버데비 sig마야 랑기 책된 게 랑기 책된 게월 셰비 신다 더 메뉴 셰와 더 메뉴 셰 최이고네 딜레 도와타다 토르샤네 딜레 도와타다 토라 샤제네 레기 다니 마리와니 도 제치 좀발라스 디스워다 상이조데 데스요로 상이조데 데스요다 가이로니 가자마 소조마디오 에르비게 가리바데 베식스디 히아드 고니디 베시 벤다 쳐와메다 셀리 이데요 요가지도 요리 셀리 이데요 뭐지 시아도보 엘레기르도 히데 디게디 오늘 장상게 예디 가나 레시는 딜 리바드 데바리요로 세메토에서 리바드 데바로와 Ina riba devate redi china kya de ne ti shele gide ke in so so big legi de nyo de na in henda de to ma re shi ba no te ma san yi je de ta mo wa de ne ron du go wa se ne in sin je ta je de so yi ta te in ye ba ta mi so de so sa ni in big san yi go je wa de de wa de yi ze tel sha ne yong go re ta mo ran ma de ni he mi de shi de in tambo rang di tiwa changme sum so sa ti sa sa ne in ngoba sang yin in shui ko ko ro wa this is what
So that's why here, even in this Triratna Dasa praise of infinite qualities, which explain that some who are undisciplined use reasonable words but contradict these words, so they are called unable to help others to discipline themselves. So here actually, which is like Buddha himself clearly stated out that without subduing yourself, there's no way to subdue others. And even the reasonable word, which means that any teaching that if you really teach, actually everything, every word has a reason there. It makes sense. There's a meaning there, like about Four Noble Truth or Six Perfections, or like avoiding non-virtuous action. When you explain, that has a meaning there. It has a reason. It makes sense. But the same way, whatever we're explaining in a very reasonable way, but we're not following the same way, that becomes unreasonable. That's why. So that's why, like Buddha himself has clearly stated out that before subduing yourself, there's no way to subdue others. So even you know the life history, the historical Buddha Shakyamuni also, before he lead the disciple to the right direction, he has renounced, he has practiced through, he has overcome all the delusions of the mental and physical and verbal. And after realizing, after achieving Buddha, then he gave a teachings, not like while he was still full of delusions and negativities that he didn't give. So even Buddha himself, before he guided the disciple to others, he has practiced through, he has realized through, and then explained to others. So I thought today we'll finish this chapter, but it's just not going to finish, so we'll leave here today. And if you have any question, please ask. Okay.
Can you talk about, you talked a lot about realizations. Other than the realization of emptiness, can you give some examples of realizations?
That also the danda kadina that chi the tharba the thamji kamba top gere che de tobege che du che di tharba toba da thamji kamba che dishiniga dishi da toba se di 똥이 또알라 계제 시고르베 가르케제 시고레사 가드는 타르바 탐지 겸바드 체다 디시니 펜토고레세디 체 다도다 치마 펜토고레세 라고 바라단다 가디나 어디디 가래 똥이 또야 이게 계제 시고르 가르레스기도
알레 가드타다 추시네 체 디니가 페야세 디게 시고레 네 네 티데레다 추 디지가 다다다 그래서 체 델페다다 소주 마시 베자마지 비게지 봉위나 인세 델펜도 여러와 정말 보고 뭐 근데 tum그리 뒤땅도 쉬어 뭐 무슨 저거로
no
다디반에 저 심한 gond다 에서 심자시 그때 타르바도 탐지시베 줄로 그래야지 소 성로 고는 게 제일 상로로 와 어디다 너도 애니 다 상기점대 내용소 해와다 이는데 펜도도 디마 당이 같이 자가시 부여 같이 뒤로 가가 개바 유네 필리리나가 텔파니 예디 표현 쉐어로 와 그때 딱 건지 배는 또 이제 가게대 건지 리베 또토거래 나 이제 참모도 때 가보러 와
인심이 똥이 떠고야 말아 인심이 똥이 거네 계시고요
인심이 똥이 또 계시고 뭐다 타가 토를 똥이 또 그러 와 그다다 세지 인가 기보야 똥이 또 가야 돼요 말에 신의 군두상 똥이 또 뭐지 신의 군세디가 기보요 그래서 와
which explain that realization or like benefiting this life and next life or realization is not necessarily mean that you have to achieve emptiness or talk about emptiness, because even like if we use our own intelligence and analyze that, and it's like even without realizing emptiness also, if we engage into like 10 virtuous actions, then the fruitions of this 10 virtuous action is to have a fortunate rebirth or higher fortunate rebirth. So it doesn't explain about emptiness also. And also like even by practicing on the meditative equipoise and then penetrative insight also, it never explained clearly about the emptiness, because even by practicing on this shamatha and vipassana, also without realizing emptiness also, it will help us to achieve the mental and physical pliancy, which means it's not, we haven't achieved emptiness yet, but it gives us the mental peace and physical strength at that time, but without realizing emptiness. So that's a benefit. It never explained about emptiness also. Of course, if we want to achieve the nirvana, self-realization, then one has to achieve emptiness from there. So nirvana, emptiness, and bodhisattva level of bhumis, from there, like then we have to achieve emptiness and so forth. But in order to achieve realization or those things, the highest state of achievement is a realization. So that's why not necessarily have to achieve emptiness. If it's the right question, answer. Yes.
Well, actually, this answer didn't answer her question. Her question was different. The question, okay, so now to you.
Okay.
The question was, Julie was asking, what other type of realizations are there? We've heard of realization of emptiness, but Geshe said that the Kadampa Geshes have different realizations. What are these realizations? That's what she was asking.
Kadampa sugi da danda morang kedi shedi danda tharba thoya da thamji khemba santa de sedi ani Kadampa sugi mangpuji da soso gomtop gi ani shego ware se di konsu gomne gar thar chimba inache thar chimba gi gar thar chine ani odi keje shigi sare sigido the Kadampa sugi danda chushe da samsosu nyamdo gi shigo ora daga sheba jamgi mare odi nyamdo se da gar nyamne thar chine 똥이 냠는 탈치니나 가르레서 근데네도 지게서라.
알레 디카도스 다시도 쓰거라.
어나.
예, 카이도스 카탐지 당어 튀어서기도.
어디 거기서 똥이 또 차네나 가네 나시고 왔다.
어디다 집이 슝을람 기라 거기 상지 송 가데지이나 어디 강사지 상제 림발 미베야지 파유야단 요 말이시. 근데 가가 강사지 상제 차긴도 요리시. 어디내지 또 냠슬링게들 까탐이 당아 샤서기도. 까탐을 찍었다.
Actually, this the Kadampa, those who have who has achieved, means that whatever they have studied, they have applied into their own practice, and with this experience of their own practice, based on that practice that they are explaining, whatever they are practicing, they have achieved or on that they're explaining. So it also explained about it's not necessary they're achieving emptiness or something, but realize in some degree of their own practice.
Okay, so for example, if they, let's say they meditated on the precious human rebirth, would that be a realization? Would they achieve a realization, and then they can teach on that topic?
Pena koda kadambagi nyamnyong sing da kar de pena ta kasa the galore the milerim bochi kone da nyamlen de hagone dila nyamlen jene od milerim bochi sing one hagone ane di kone standard of sig horbe sa pena ina milerim bochi kone da milerim bochi ta gane thobine de samma den da hagone so nyamlen jene ane den she den da ochi rebe sigdu Milerim bochi sing yora milerim bochi thotande ta konsa hagone da gane thobina di da milerim bochi sa chambo intande hagone nyamlen jene ane o den da sig horbe kande re sigdu
deda sigore da deda sigora milise ta shembre se de kare sen de sigora kanje dewa dewa dunga mi dewa ganga chikwa ya zang. Ini dunga di pasaya da dewa dewa tabji ji shiya da sole no go orwa. Shada di tabji shiya di da tenjo ten di de mi ma ju ten hendala de na hi ya go de riba chonggo da de ko ga go ma ro.
어디 하다 코나 냠린진 하고네 다 디지 이네
어디서 다디 다 게드 보나 하고 거라. tenjo ten de 가 디고 시데 가 용 요아시에 가가 랑도 힘고 와. 랑도 힘고서 다디 이 tenjo 자 셔보 이제 되게 시거든요. 자 제가 다시 보면서 저 배주 마다 거 자시 뭐 편도 말아 봐. 저 앞에도 세인데 부지 되게 가서 강바가 있는 대중 견수 저것도 대현 패도 뭐 지버로 와. 어제 이제다 배주 땅 저기 세야 되와. 배주 땅나디 가서는 냠선해야 될뭐 이게 배주 로고 땅에 가요 뭐. 어디서
yes, some are like knowing about the preciousness of a human rebirth, because knowing that clearly, with clear understanding about the preciousness of our life, with these 10 endowment or 8 freedom or those things, after understanding clearly, then once you understand, then when you explain, there's a different flavor there, there's a richness there, and then like once you know that, then you will likely to like encourage that, oh, we have this good opportunity, we should not misuse it or let it go or waste it, because if we waste, then there's like we wasting our precious life. So Geshe was explaining about like, even though one have a goal in my house and I'm just dying here of hunger, then the goal is useless. So having a goal in my house, if I know how to use that goal, then I will have plenty of food. So that's why I have this precious goal in my life. So if I don't know how to use properly, then it's a waste of having a precious gold. So something that's how that Kadampa master clearly understand those things and try to explain and also apply them. Otherwise, if we have this and we don't know, then we may not know how to use properly, and we may not appreciate having this goal also.
And finally, to conclude this question, but does that mean that every Lamrim topic has its own corresponding realization?
Tanda di lamringi di denda changmala den digi di da chik da gomtop la pengo orwesa gomjala pengo orwesa nyamlen di thar chimbala pengo orwesa di lamringi da changma da goa changma rere yoro goa mangbu yoro la odi goa rere gi di da sosola dane pa da ya nyamlen gom la pengo orwesa da
어디 팬도 orda 냠le 곰 팬도 orda 그 곰도 림바 지어와 림바 마저신 시고 orwa
no
어디 강가다 세대 강사지 상지 림바리 시기도
no
마테 시기도 강사지 강가 냠랭고
yes, every lamrim that explained in a lamrim, it has to lead to your realization, but it has to be in sequence, not like not in messing up the subject. It has to be, and also like even Geshe was explaining about the thousands of volumes of teachings were explained just to liberate one being, one person, not all person. So it must have this sequence, step by step. So yes.
Do those realizations, like on the path, just step by step that you're talking about,
Yeah.
do they carry over so that if you're fortunate enough to have another perfect human rebirth, that with very little exposure, that realization comes back and then you progress, or is it something that you can lose? Or those realizations sequential?
Yes. Pena da nganza nimanira la anta lobjong je da hagone nyamlen je de nyamlening ki top gi nganza da chik tharba ji da thori ngondo thori gobang thop go orala ode thobonde da pena kyo dila da lobjong je ne da je kyo jemala da kyo yakuj lena di debu de sa danda che de la sa be debu de yang chang an so gi di long che yor be sa de pen demba do yor la da lob jong do je san nyam do je san yang ke wa shin to bol na di je san yang go chu ro be sa di yan di ba cha da ra den din mut ne nyam je ne ya sang ge re be si do
ale tesi da nuni ki da zen tesi da 다다 탭자르나 디 방자게 저 심어들 될 차드르시 근데 디 심어들 될 차드르시 디제 봉야 칼리 칼시네 야르도 또 이제 근데 끼와들 때 전에 때시 처심을 남살로 먹고 디제 샤고 말아 디샤고 말이시
it needs what you call concentrations and virtue, which call the enthusiasm. Yes, in this life that we understand, we practice, because the imprints of that practice and understanding that we will have another fortunate rebirth. There we have that imprints there. But doesn't mean that we don't have to study or practice. We have to practice, but we're adding on top of it. We have to study, but it will be easier to understand because we have already have an imprint there. But if you don't study and progress on that, then it will fade away, because we're exhausting at that same time. So when we continuously practicing, we are adding, because the imprints is already there, it will be easier to progress. Okay.
Bob asked about
yes.
Sequential. Now, when you mention sequential, the realization has to be sequential. What does that mean? Does that mean that you cannot have a realization of, let's say, of death and impermanence before you have realization of precious human rebirth?
Sorry, what?
What do you mean by, what did Geshe mean by the realizations have to be sequential? Does that mean that you cannot have a realization of a subsequent topic?
No,
before?
Not sequential means there must have an order, in orderly way.
Okay,
orderly.
Same. What does that mean?
So orderly means penang anso di bharim do chiore chila so ala. Di bharim di gande do bharim chigore sa. Ta penang nyamlen jela bharim chiore chila so ala.
Jamle bharim do dekhade sen dire da. Ta pen ta chho do tarwa thobge ne bjena. Ta khoji khonso de ta tamo so de dewa dunge mindu se din gozu ro.
No.
Seta dewa da dunge di kuso da dewa mindu ne dewa dunge di judo ya da dunge se ya o tinde nam ya da khonji chino gangal chi kheu ti kheu ro. Seta ta se ya thab do khande sigur ta se da khande sigur se na. En dire sigur se ya ta nodu da nangbe shon se ba ina te sigur ba ta. Tongbo de te sigur ta kaji kan karsa dunge tsaw de khande yung du dunge khade yung du oti se shab shab ta dunge de se ya thab do khade du se oti se ta si du no in lende de yung gor ba penta se de yung gor da pen ni khasa jik ba ina me ba jik ba ina ani pe thome mongbo de ji jolu mongbo yung de gor jik ba de se ti yung a de khare sin yung gor ko gime de shin yung ene gaga jik ba yung so mo de khaji ya bo yung khaji do ja yung ga yung ma ra se ti khabar khara de khade yung de se ani ta le ju de se ya ti jul de ne yung ya ti ni ripe do to ra ti do to yo da ini dunia se ya da dewa do ya ta bi ti ya se ini ke migwal se na ini digwa ya wa se na ti do ya bo ya de o de to stel pa ni ini de se na in lende nam ja se lende na ya se ne lende pe na ta chima pe na migju bu se chima thori ke na thori zam ke ba da pendo hira yo ra ya de thori ki dibuchi de yo de te khandam ro che ni ya khandam di digwa sa ni ya yin song ro sha ro wa se de sha da ta thori zam na be thong ye kha pe thom na phok te mo de me a shin ni de ni mo yo ma yin song do gu ye za de dam pen sa ma re sam ni ya thar wa kha ja go re se wa de ya bo na shin thar wa zam to na nen so do yon de ma zo hem do shi ba jo mo ri 행동을 타시는 거 소소하게 방도용데 저 말아. 제가 또 뒤지나 쇼문득스타 심지 탐지 동대네. 산지고 뭐또 인랑이 가게 통소야 용도서 방도들이야 되고 그랬어.
So this the order, the how to practice in order is because firstly, like when we want to engage into our dharma or practice, why we engage firstly. Our first bottom line is we don't want suffering when we want happiness. Actually, these are the foundation, because everyone don't want suffering and we want happiness. That's the foundation. So now, based on that, so firstly, based on that, like how that the suffering arises, because before that happiness and suffering, the experience of suffering is always more stronger. So we try to understand about suffering. So once like we know about the suffering, so eventually that after when we understand about the suffering, so it really lead us to understand about the cause and effect, the karma, the law of cause and effect. Because of knowing that everything is happening because of the law of cause and effect, and it eventually will help us to understand about without causes and condition, there's no such thing called suffering or happiness. That means there's always reason behind with karma. There's nothing happening accidentally or out of nowhere. So that's why, like, once we understand about there's a cause and condition behind the suffering, so that eventually shows that there's no such thing that because the less negative action will fruit with big negative suffering, or because the more the negative action will fruit into small suffering or less suffering. So that means it has an equal balance with these law of cause and effect. So then with this understanding, then eventually that firstly that we'll think about, okay, then if I have to overcome those suffering, then yes, the first we want to know is about the actions of our three doors, the body, speech, and mind. So that eventually goes to that these are the 10 non-virtuous action are the main causes and condition that is leading me to suffer in this life or next life. So we understand. So we try to follow that based on this 10 non-virtuous action, try to avoid that. So eventually, we will know that avoiding and engaging into virtuous action and virtuous action, it lead us to the virtuous and fortunate rebirth. So once we achieve fortunate rebirth also, then they will know, oh, that's not enough, because even though with the help of this 10 virtuous action, I am achieving this fortunate rebirth, but still I'm in the cycle of life. So that means I have to strive towards liberation. So that's why I want to understand more that how can I overcome from this cycle. So if I know that only by achieving liberation, then I can be able to overcome from this bondage of this cycle of suffering. So with these, that I will try to understand about how do I achieve liberation. So even now, because of that also, even in case that if I maybe achieved the liberation also, then still I will think that, oh, this is only how selfish I am, because I am only liberating, overcoming suffering of my own. It's my own selfish intention, while all the mother sentient beings are still in the cycle of life, suffering in this cycle of life. How can I be so selfish? And even that I didn't even have overcome the omniscient, obstruction to omniscient, that I didn't even overcome that. So if I want to overcome and to know all the omniscient mind and the Buddhahood, in order to benefit all sentient beings, only by achieving the fully enlightenment called Buddha, then I can be able to liberate all sentient beings. So with these, when we understand that way, step by step, so that is what we should not mess up this step in order to follow. I think that's the rough explanation. I don't know how to explain properly.
대화 배는 다들 세부기를 주신 되시고 아니 심지어는 닝지 시부터 다가 디바 시부 닝지 시부터 해야지 시거라 제 닝지 시부터 시거라 니 동부 소소야 아니 그게 리스는 동해로 가게 용어도 문제가 더 내가 되게 민지 동해 몽고 용거로 어디 용거에서 되는 게 맞아 심지어 현다 동해 하고 그러 맞아 심지어 가서 공이 해봐 그것도 동해 하고 말아 제 니는 소소 동해 티 될 텐데 괜다 소소 동해는 이제 심지어 현다라 동해 인자 인 심지어 현다 뒤에 동해 세야 타기셔야지 고도에 인이 돼도 용거 그러 되면 소소 동해야 이만 좀세 거의 종사는 말이지 집상도 상수 내게도 심지어 인지야 인지야 말아 그때다 테너시 주거래
So it's an example Geshe is giving that, like, we always try to generate a great compassion, means wishing and willing or engaging into action to free others from the suffering. So in order to have that great compassion for others, firstly you had to feel your own suffering. Because without experiencing and feeling your own suffering and try to have great compassion towards others, it won't work. It doesn't make sense also. And you won't have that great compassion towards others without understanding and experiencing your own sufferings. That's why, like, before we engage in practicing the great compassion towards others, firstly, you have to feel the suffering yourself, understand your suffering yourself, and overcoming. So only like when you have that urge or willing or like forcing yourself to overcome the suffering of yourself, then eventually you will try to think about the suffering and overcome the sufferings of others. So that's why this step by step has to, the reason why that it shows in a step by step is to understand that way. Okay, we stop here. Lama dangam bojizin jambe yang la chatse lo. Langye lo de debne tende nye da nam da rapse. Jinye denge jishe ze je nye ke tukra lepan. Kanda sebe tsen rai mare mento imdunye gese. Drozo ikin layan boje da se yan layan druje yan dens. Drodra che droye nye mo nye ro lege chan droye ndeze. Mare mense dungyo nye go jinye che ze rel den. Dene da che sa che da se yende le zoe ge se duye. Chu dai chu nye gente da le mense chambe yang la de om mara bazane de mara bazane om mara bazana di ze den ke ra we ze da le de mo men boy rabzen ka da den je shun lo yo to bai lo je po be na wa ze do se lo je ja zo no be kara de ke sa pon be ju de men bai den bai zin la wan do ke chu be ta nian chu gen zhang la se wa de. Okay. Vietnamese or English? In front of like Dharma, rouses us from the stupor of delusions and free us from the non-delusional karma, who heal us sword of wisdom, hewing down suffering, clearing away the darkness of ignorance. You who have been pure from the beginning, who have staging highest profile of the Bodhisattva, whose personal body is adorned with 112 marks of the Buddha. I bow down to you, Manjushri, Om Arapasanadi, O compassionate one, with the brilliance of your wisdom, illuminates the darkness, enclosing my mind, intending in wisdom, so that I may gain insight in the Buddha's words and the texts that explain them. Merging knowing with unfortunate beings, your realm pervades all directions. You are present, meaningful, and rolling the richest doctrine. To you, O Lord Santenzing Wanda, respectfully I pray.
Nhất tâm kính lễ Đức Văn Thù Sư Lợi, bậc đại trí ngài điều phục hai chướng ngại, tự nhật quan lan tỏa khắp mười phương, bậc thực chứng chân nghĩa màu rốt ráo, từ tim ngài bát nhã kinh thủ hộ nhiệm màu, cõi luân hồi chúng sanh thọ nghiệp báo, bị ngăn che bởi phiền não vô minh, sở hữu 60 pháp âm thù thắng, dùng đại bi ngài hóa độ chúng sanh, tựa từ mẫu chăm lo cho quý tử. Tiếng rồng vang ngài thức tỉnh hữu tình. Tận diệt muôn vàn khổ đau cùng ách nạn, trường tử Như Lai tối thắng toàn giác, ngài an trụ nơi thập địa pháp vân, báu thân ngài trang nghiêm thanh tịnh, 112 tướng hảo Như Lai, đê đầu đảnh lễ Đức Văn Thù Sư Lợi, cúi xin ngài tận diệt ám chướng vô minh. Om Arapasanadi. Con khẩn cầu dưới gót sen bậc đại trí, ban pháp lực diệt phiền não vô minh. Pháp vi diệu cùng muôn vàn luận giải, như diệu hương ngọt ngào từ sen trắng, đàn xanh nơi trí thù thắng đại dương, hàng thiện căn như ong mật thọ nương, hồng danh ngài khắp mười phương quảng bá, đấng thiện xảo uy dũng bảo tồn pháp bảo vô giá. Nam mô Lốp Sang Tenzin Quang Đắc. Xin cung kính trì niệm.
Gewa de ye nyuro yendo yenda la ma yesa je semjo rembo je mage banam ke juruj ke wa nyamba me ba ya gone gondo be warai sho yo tonye ta wa rembo je mage banam ke juruj ke wa nyamba me ba ya gone gondo pe warai sho sa je be je je me do dam re ra lin je nyen de gen ba de san je shin do me de yu wa ye do ge nam da shin la je barai sho ga re ra we jin kan Pendande wa male juven Jere aze wa tenze ai jazoi Shabe se de bardo Denjuro reci ye daim goro redna mendela Kaner ya daya amen